Cold Case Chronicles, The Menendez Brothers, the August 2025 parole hearings that shattered hope. Chapter 1, The Day of Reckoning. You're sitting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room of a California parole hearing facility. The date is August 21st, 2025. After 36 years behind bars, Erik Menendez, now 54 years old, with graying hair and the weathered face of a man who has spent more than half his life in prison, is about to face the most important 10 hours of his adult life. Erik Menendez was denied parole during his first ever parole hearing on Thursday, 36 years, and 1 day after he and his brother killed their parents. But before that crushing decision came down, there was hope, there was testimony. There was a man desperately trying to convince a panel of commissioners that he deserved freedom. After a hearing lasting nearly 10 hours, the state's Board of Prison Terms ruled Thursday that Menendez can reapply for parole after 3 years, the soonest possible interval under state law. Chapter 2, What Erik Said, A Man's Desperate Plea. During his hearing, he offered his most detailed account in years of how he was raised and why he made the choices he did, both at the time of his parents' killing and during his decades in prison. Erik Menendez sat before the parole board commissioners, his hands clasped, his voice steady but filled with decades of pain and regret. In testimony before the panel, he described himself at the time of the killings as dishonest, angry, and impulsive, and having been raised with no moral foundation. He described his father, Jose, as the most terrifying human being I'd ever met, and said he feared being raped by him the night of the murders. For 10 grueling hours, Erik faced question after question. He spoke of the sexual abuse that had haunted his childhood, the psychological torture that had shaped his teenage years, and the moment of terror and rage that led to the shotgun blasts that ended 2 lives on that August night in 1989. I was dishonest, angry, and impulsive, Erik admitted to the commissioners. I had no moral foundation. These weren't the words of a man making excuses. They were the confessions of someone who had spent 36 years trying to understand how he became capable of such violence. He described his father, Jose, as the most terrifying human being I'd ever met. The fear in his voice was palpable as he recounted the night of the murders, explaining that he believed his father was going to sexually assault him again. Chapter 3, The Prison Violations That Sealed His Fate. But Erik's heartfelt testimony wasn't enough. The commissioners determined that Menendez should not be freed after an all-day hearing, during which they questioned him about why he committed the crime and violated prison rules. A state board commissioner said Menendez's behavior in prison contributed to the decision to deny his parole. The prison violations became a crucial factor in the board's decision. While Erik had tried to present himself as a reformed man who had found purpose in helping other inmates and pursuing education, his record showed instances where he had broken prison rules. They rejected parole despite strong support from family members who have advocated for the brothers' release. Family members had testified on his behalf, painting a picture of a man who had grown, who had learned, who deserved a second chance. But it wasn't enough. The commissioners saw a man who, despite decades in prison, still couldn't fully control his behavior within the institution's walls. To them, this suggested he might not be ready for the freedoms of society. Chapter 4. The Crushing Decision. The atmosphere in the hearing room grew heavy as the commissioners delivered their verdict. A California parole board has denied parole for Erik Menendez, who was convicted alongside his brother Lyle of murdering their parents in 1989, delivering a crippling blow to the brothers' years-long fight for release. Eric's face showed little emotion as the words were spoken, but those who knew him could see the devastation in his eyes. 36 years of hoping, of believing that someday he might walk free, came crashing down in that moment. The board determined that despite the new evidence of abuse, despite the support from family members, despite Eric's claims of rehabilitation, he still posed too great a risk to society. The violence of that night in 1989, the calculated brutality of multiple shotgun blasts, weighed too heavily against him. Chapter 5. Lyle's Turn. Hope turns to despair. 24 hours later, you're back in that same sterile room. This time, it's Lyle Menendez, Eric's older brother, now 57, facing the panel. His brother, Lyle Menendez, is set to go before the panel Friday. If there had been any hope left after Eric's rejection, it was about to be extinguished completely. A California parole board has denied parole for Lyle Menendez, who was convicted alongside his brother of murdering their parents in 1989. Lyle Menendez denied parole for 1989 shotgun murder of parents, one day after brother also failed to gain freedom from prison. The pattern repeated itself. Hours of testimony, hours of questioning, hours of hope slowly dying as it became clear that the board was not convinced that either brother was ready for freedom. Chapter 6. The New Evidence That Wasn't Enough. The petition presents two pieces of new evidence. One is allegations from a former member of the boy band Menudo, who revealed in the 2023 docuseries Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, that he was raped by Jose Menendez. The second is a letter Erik Menendez wrote to his cousin 8 months before the murders, describing the ongoing abuse he was suffering. This new evidence had given the brothers and their supporters hope. Roy Rossello's allegations seemed to corroborate the brothers' claims about their father's abusive nature. The letter Erik had written to his cousin appeared to show that the abuse was ongoing right up until the murders. But the parole board looked at this evidence and saw something different. They saw a crime that was still too brutal, too calculated, too final to be excused by abuse, no matter how horrific that abuse might have been. Chapter 7. What the board really thought. The commissioners didn't just look at the new evidence. They looked at the crime itself, at the brothers' behavior afterward, and at their conduct in prison. They saw two men who had pumped multiple shotgun rounds into their parents at close range. They saw the spending spree that followed. They saw prison violations that suggested a continued inability to follow rules and control impulses. Most importantly, they saw a crime that was so extreme, so brutal, that 36 years wasn't enough to balance the scales of justice. The board's message was clear. Some crimes are so heinous that no amount of time, no amount of rehabilitation, no amount of new evidence can erase them. The Menendez brothers had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Epilogue: 3 more years of waiting. As you leave the hearing facility, you can feel the weight of what just happened. Two men who had dared to hope for freedom after more than 3 decades in prison had that hope crushed in the span of 2 days. The state's Board of Prison Terms ruled Thursday that Menendez can reapply for parole after 3 years, the soonest possible interval under state law. 3 more years. For men already in their 50s, 3 more years might as well be a lifetime. The August 2025 parole hearings weren't just about Erik and Lyle Menendez. They were about the question of whether our justice system believes in redemption, whether abuse can ever justify extreme violence, and whether some crimes are simply unforgivable. The parole board's answer was unambiguous. The shotgun blasts that echoed through that Beverly Hills mansion 36 years ago are still echoing today, and they will continue to echo for at least 3 more years, when the brothers will once again sit before a panel of commissioners and ask for something they may never receive: forgiveness. The courtroom drama that captivated America in the 1990s continues to this day. But in those sterile hearing rooms in August 2025, it became clear that some stories don't have happy endings, some crimes don't have redemption, and some prisoners, no matter how much they've changed, no matter how much they've suffered, will never taste freedom again. The Menendez brothers will be eligible to apply for parole again in 2028. Whether they will succeed then remains to be seen, but the August 2025 hearings made one thing clear: the road to freedom, if it exists at all, is far longer than anyone imagined.